Here we go. All right. Yes, this is the Live Your Dream School of Medical Arts podcast I'm starting. And why are we doing this? Well, gosh, I run a lot of peer support groups that are highly confidential, where physicians are sharing things like they've never shared with anyone else in their whole life. And wow, some of them are willing to come on here and now share some of this like outside of our group. And I think the reason why we need to start having these deeper, authentic, truly honest conversations is that there's no place for people to go and have these conversations. And for the people that are courageous enough to share openly what they've survived, it can only help other people survive, like the trauma, the pain, and the suicidality that is rampant in society, not just doctors, but this is primarily doctors. And anyone could be in the Live Your Dream School of Medical Arts, like any health professional, or anyone that wants to help others heal, but it's primarily doctors and medical students. So, Amir, hi, you're the first guest on the
Mhm.
podcast. Do you want to share who you are? And maybe I'll just share a little bit just to introduce you, right? You're an anesthesiologist who's lost four family members to suicide, including your very famous physician father. And you also were thereafter entrapped in an insurance fraud scam while you were trying to heal in the world as a humanitarian. And you were very busy helping people who nobody else would see with chronic pain and other issues. And in the midst of this, somebody came into your world that you were collaborating with and didn't quite realize what was going on until the feds were at your door. And then you actually just got out of prison, 6 months in prison for this. So you've survived a lot. And the thing that really inspires me about you is that despite all of this, four family members, nuclear family dead by suicide, and as a physician losing your ability to practice medicine and going to prison, like you've never been suicidal. Is that true?
That's Pamela, true. Thank you, for asking, for having me, share this with everyone. I have throughout all of the trauma, the experiences, my family, my professional practice. I've never experienced, the suicidal ideation. I've never experienced that. I've never attempted. I've never um, uh, been hospitalized or treated for suicidal ideation. I have experienced, severe trauma, and that is something that I guess we're going to talk about more today. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have been passively suicidal since I was 9 years old, is the first time I remember that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I don't want to. I think Amir and I have had previous conversations where just even sharing some of the actual granular detail about what's happened to us in the past has been so startling that our own therapists that we've been to look like they have PTSD just listening to us. So I don't think it's helpful that we give like extreme details about what we've survived, but let's just say we've survived a hell of a lot. Like I was kidnapped 3 times before I was 9 in custody battles with my two physician parents who were workaholics, who were not emotionally accessible. I didn't particularly feel safe as a child, although I love them. I am not disparaging my parents. I honor and love them. However, let me just tell you, this made me who I am today, somebody who I feel like can survive anything. And so Amir and I have a shared experience. Wow, we have a lot of overlapping, interesting stories that we won't get into today, but we do have the shared experience of surviving complete horror, like horrible scenes that nobody would even want to read about in a book. Let's just put it that way. And the purpose of us coming together, because again, Live Your Dream School of Medical Arts, like the whole goal is that we have physicians that are capable, responsible, ethical, that are willing to do house calls, bend over backwards to help patients. And right now, we have instead a group of people who have the highest suicide rate, or a very high suicide rate out of any profession. And actually, male anesthesiologists have the highest suicide rate out of all physicians. And Amir is a male anesthesiologist. So I would love to know, Amir, some of the tips. I know you've never been suicidal. However, you certainly have had dark nights of the soul moments, I would assume. It just didn't go into self-harm mode or self-harm thinking. But how, like, what techniques, just for anyone listening to this who is having a dark night of the soul moment, which is probably a lot of people in the world right now, what tactics did you use personally to kind of pull yourself out of the coffin that you were in, that your life had sort of fallen into?
That's a great question. And the um, uh, I guess when I think of some of the earliest traumatic events that I experienced, the um, the initial reflexive response when I was a child was that I would compartmentalize and separate myself from the actual feelings, and that actually is something that as I mentioned, it happened reflexively. So I would in the aftermath of the trauma, I would say that I'm going to choose to think about that at a later time, and I would, hermetically seal, bubble wrap that, put it into a box, and I would tell myself I'm going to have to address that later. And that became sort of a default mode of approaching trauma. And I had serial traumas during childhood that many of us have experienced. And what that allowed me to do was to be functional, but I always was living behind a mask, and that mask was where I would mimic, or I would simulate the emotions or behaviors of other people that were either close to be my family, or at school, or with friends. And that masking ultimately became really an exhaustive experience. But that was the first kind of innate response. Later on, what that evolved into was that I decided that I had a center in my existence that I attached a sacred meaning to, and that couldn't be violated. It couldn't, in any circumstance, be approached, or challenged, or defeated. And that was kind of where I am today. That's how I looked at trauma. I said, this is, again, I separate myself from the actual event, and then I say I'm going to maintain, as it were, a red line, and nothing's going to cross that. And that sort of code, it became a mantra, and I believe that really was the beginning of a system that I built around these events that kept happening. And I think a lot of people actually are probably exposed to trauma and develop similar tactics and similar tools in crisis. But that has really sustained me through all of the throughout the years.
So let me see if I get this. You bubble wrapped the trauma and you put it in a different little compartment somewhere inside of you, but sort of held it in a sacred place, knowing that you were going to have to return to it. And you recognize that this isn't you. It's just something that you witness that you're going to revisit in the future when you have the wisdom and the time and space and mental stability to revisit it. Is that what you
That's
are?
an excellent description. Yes. After a trauma, for example, I had a lot of questions that I knew that I wasn't going to get the answers to. Why did it happen? And why did it happen to me? And then there's questions such as,
Let me just say one thing, like we'll just kind of not to tell everyone the terrible things that you've seen, but for example, what was it, age 10, you walked in and you found your mother had died by suicide. So that would be an example, without going into lots of specifics, of you bubble wrapping this scenario and revisiting it later.
that's right. I mean, obviously there was shock there was despair and, you know, we were we're all in a significant amount of emotional pain, my family, but um I when I went to my mother's funeral, and then when we dealt with the aftermath of her absence, that's when this started to actually to present uh, as a tool, and then I decided, okay, I have to understand this, but I can't do that today. So
Right.
I'm gonna have to wait. And then many years later I met Pamela. And she helped me understand, and many others. And I've done a lot of work in the last few years to understand suicide and the meaning behind it and what our response can be, and how we navigate a crisis. Why is the epidemic of suicides happening amongst physicians and then non-physicians all over the world? But certainly we are dealing with it with an epidemic. It's an affliction, and we've created a lot of knowledge and understanding, but every day another physician will die in this country, every single day. And it's very disheartening. It's hard, for me and for all of us here that understand the enormity of the loss. So uh, I think that we can pick up, after our lives are smashed, shattered into a million pieces. We can pick up from that point, and we can come back, and we can do a tremendous amount to bring understanding and healing to the community of physicians that's suffering.
Interesting. I'll just share the very first tactic that and I've never really had this conversation before, but I do think we need to move from, I think now we're in a state where, at least within our profession, people are no longer stating that I'm embellishing and exaggerating the situation with physician suicide, which is what I ran up against 12 years ago. I think we've got a lot of, I guess the awareness campaign has worked, but we're moving into like, well, okay, how do we prevent this? What is the solution here? And so I just want to share, I have two physician parents. They both suffer from mental illness. My dad, a lot of I mean, I think everyone has some degree of mental illness, right? My dad is like OCD, it tends towards depression. My mom is a psychiatrist who's been homicidal and suicidal in her life, and she actually survived just outrageous, incredible trauma as a child. So again, I have great compassion for both of my parents. And yet, what happened to me as the oldest child, I became the parentified child who sort of felt like I had to emotionally be the caretaker for both of my parents. and stabilize them individually and their marriage, right? And so, but their marriage wasn't to be. Like it wasn't going to be a winning scenario relationship. So I wow, during the custody battle, I think what brought this back to me, they had a psychologist interview everyone in my family. I was 7 years old, and this PhD psychologist determined the end result of the 17-page document. This is hard to take in for me, maybe hard for other people to listen to, but his summary statement there was neither parent had love of the child, has love of the children for their motivation for custody. For the father, it's self-preservation, and for the mother, it's revenge. And his statement about me and my mental health, which it's great that I have this little time capsule of what my mental health was as a 7-year-old by this court-appointed PhD psychologist. He said that what was keeping me in good shape at the moment wasn't that I had these parents, but was that I had the ability to seek nurturing and surrogates in so many other people, like the teacher's aide and this and that. And, so I'm just remembering this is very different than compartmentalization, which I think I did a little bit of that, but I tended to, even from the beginning, I mean, I just had a very scary, chaotic childhood. I tended to just tell everyone everything. Like, I mean, anyone, like anyone who would listen to me would get as much as I could explain that they were willing to listen to. And I just didn't stop. It was one-on-one conversations with people who I felt like maybe actually did care about me. I don't think any of these adults knew what to do with the information I was delivering to them, but I think the act of just saying it out loud and feeling like somebody was listening and not containing it, I feel like if I were to contain everything I had witnessed and not let any of it out, I would be on drugs and laying in an alley, like barely functional. I was constantly, what I say, in surgical terms, using the metaphor of draining the emotional abscess with the loculated pockets. I feel like I was constantly doing that with whoever I could drip this on to, assuming that the adults would kind of know what to do or not walk away from me.
Yes.
And so I not only did it with living people, I would actually tell my dog, any pets, I would tell the whole story. Like I have, and maybe you would understand this having been in prison, but I would just talk to the wall. I would sit and tell my whole story about what my day was like at school and what my mother's reaction was to something. And I would just talk to a wall. And I think the act of just getting it out of my system was helpful. And what I was thinking about ahead of our conversation today is how many doctors have written me about their suicidal thoughts, like these long tomes on my contact page at idealmedicalcare.org. They'll just submit it's amazing that it even comes through. It's like some of these are very lengthy. And at the very end, they'll write, well, I don't know if you're ever going to read this, but I feel so much better having written this. So there's some sort of therapeutic benefit to journal writing or sharing, even if you're talking to a wall, a dog. I would talk to the horse we had in Texas. I would tell my teacher's aide in third grade. I mean, literally anyone who could handle me was going to get an earful.
I think that that's exactly what happened when we were in your group, Pamela. I saw that for myself and for the other group participants. um, we have a story, we want to tell it. It's really important to be able to reach other people in this setting, and without the fear of reporting, and with confidentiality, and to be able to respect that the pain, the pain can actually, we can actually touch the pain, the emotional pain. It's so severe in some places, it's really tender, and it's hard for people to discuss it. And what you did was, I think, really an advanced form of self therapy. But I think that that's it's an amazing story, in and of itself.
But I did the dissociation thing too, which I'll just say is a version of the like wrap it in bubble wrap and put it in a corner and then come back to it later. Because I was being raised by two lesbians in rural Texas in 1977. One, my mom, a psychiatrist who was not really functioning that well all the time and was kind of scary sometimes. My dad's the permissive parent who's just fun and lets eat chocolate bars all day long, and you could have 13 cereals and whatever you want from the store, like very permissive. And my mom was like a drill sergeant. Well, her partner was a child psychotherapist who was really not very kind to me, is my memory, and almost like I won't go into all the details, but I think what I want to say about another tactic that I used, which is a little bit of dissociation, where I definitely have memories of sort of floating in the clouds above scenes in my house. Um, and then what I would do with it is turn it into comedy because I'm like, this is like so absurd what's going on. I live with two mental health specialists and they are so emotionally off their rocker. Like, this is the most bizarre, like, nobody would believe this. So, in my mind, I'm not making up stories. I'm just connecting threads of the story to at least demonstrate to myself, because I think one of the unique things that really helped me, that I see a lot of doctors don't do this, but I had a very stable childhood with my father's extended family until 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and then all hell broke loose a little later. So I feel like basically my character at birth mixed with the fact that I had early stability before the complete chaos. I never ever thought this is my fault. I'm causing this. I'm bad. I just thought these adults are nuts. Like, I just thought, how am I with these? They're like experts at mental health and they couldn't be more unhealthy. And back then, like, I wasn't allowed to use a TV or telephone. They would disconnect the telephone, and, and then the TV's locked behind a door. All I had were psych textbooks. So I would, after school, just be like reading in the DSM, trying to figure out like what these two people that are supposed to be my moms have, right? And so I think it's just really important. Like, what am I basically saying here is there is a role for dissociation, um, but you have to get back to it. You can't just go into permanent dissociation. Like, it's strategic dissociation. Using comedy really helps with the dissociation because you're like, whoa, these two are nuts. And then not ever imploding upon yourself. I don't know. Does this resonate with you? The whole.
Yeah. What's really helpful, again, one of the things that really helped me was that in these specific situations, I tried to find a target where I could really change, help improve the lives of either my patients or family members or friends in my life. So if it was the death of a family member, I tried to recover by doing everything that I could to help other family members that were also experiencing pain or suffering the loss, and that really was something that it almost was an instant sort of salve. It helped me from the moment I started helping somebody else. I immediately came out of the anxiety and the fear and the anger of the trauma, and that um, is why I think so many physicians are almost robotic about their lives and their practice. So if I was experiencing trauma, I wasn't missing a day of work. I would go to work. I would see as many patients as I could, and every time I would say, "How can I help you?" or "Where is it hurt?" or where can we improve your health? I I basically completely lost myself in the care of other people, and that
Yeah,
that just
turning childhood trauma into a profession where you get
Yeah,
paid and you have status and validation that you're important and people come to you, and then you
that's right.
can lose your terrible trauma in the massive amount of trauma either collectively coming towards you or just the very sad stories that you could hear that might even minimize or cause you to minimize or even just forget for the during the workday your own trauma, right? It's like a way of workaholism as a coping strategy for avoiding the pain inside of ourselves.
And it happened in every area of my life, even at the point when I was incarcerated. It was um, a an immediate, it was a remedy. It was, you know, the doctor really, in this case, I'm speaking of myself. I was healing myself by healing other people. It was remarkable. And even though I may not have understood the depth of it at the time, it um I was constantly in front of people and their ailments, even when I was in prison. There was always a question. People always were talking about their health. It, I mean, there wasn't a moment where somebody wasn't trying to, due to the neglect that everyone was experiencing in prison. There was no access to real medical care there, that they needed help. And in a way, it's the same thing in practice, because we, in my specialty, and I was really completely, in the specialty of pain management. Many patients could not get benefits authorized and could not get treatments and could not get specific medications or advanced care or surgical procedures authorized. It was a monumental amount of suffering that these people would experience, and they had nowhere to go. They had no place to go. Nobody was going to see them. They were these were the patients that everybody, put in the trash. They went to the orthopedic surgeon, didn't work, and
Mm-hmm.
then they were with me. So um I think that that's an incredible, and in many ways an ironic way to understand trauma, is by reaching out and helping other people. I've probably done more in the way of helping myself understand trauma and maintain my emotional mental health than anything else.
So maybe one other thing we that I want to touch on because I wanted to give three tactics before we go in 6 minutes here. And the other one is, like you can't perpetually leave this thing bubble wrapped and never revisit it. The sooner you have the space to revisit it, I feel like the less damage it does overall because you don't want to contain a bunch of mummified, bubble wrapped family members, like inside of you or whatever you've been through, right? And so this is just me in medical school. I'm not going to go into the details, but I've seen some horrific things in medical school that have made me cry more than I've cried, even for losing family members. Just the cruelty and the things that I witnessed. One
Mhm.
night I cried so much that in the morning I couldn't even see. My eyes were sealed shut from the just sheer volume of crying that because I could not see the brutality of what was going on in my school any longer. And so I actually feel like that is a good method. Like I cry really easily. And, granted, you're not going to cry at work. You're going to try to contain it and do it when you can. But I feel like a lot of people try not to cry. And I strongly felt like if I lost the ability to cry, I would lose the ability to be human. So I absolutely like, I know this is just kind of a weird quote, but it's my favorite quote of the day is please enjoy the unavoidable pain. And I was in so much pain that
I
I was
love
like that
that.
one. I was wrapped around my Sheltie, my little dog, and I was just crying with snot flowing out of me and tears. Like my whole dog was wet. Like I basically used my miniature collie as a big box of Kleenex for 4 years during medical school. And so he was mostly very damp most of the time during medical training. His name's Happy because, of course, I want to be happy, but I can't just be happy by naming my dog Happy because he's covered with snot. He literally was absorbing my deep, soulful, like the way that I cried, everything about it was just extremely. I mean, I don't even think any other human being would have been able to cope with me at that point. I actually did call my parents, and my mom just wanted to get off the phone with me, and she actually mailed me psych drugs to just get me to stop crying. And then my dad didn't say anything too helpful. And so it was just me and my Sheltie, me and my wet Sheltie, and that's kind of like the therapy. It was a therapy dog for sure, an emotional therapy dog for me. But the reason why I'm sharing this is for anyone listening, you can't keep your tears contained forever. They must come out, and it's good to do it with a witness, even if it's only a pet. Or what do you think about that, Amir? Because there's a lot of people with a lot of tears to cry, and I think they feel like if they start crying, it'll be a tsunami, it'll overtake them, and especially men, where it's not like really like I'm sure in prison there's not a bunch of men crying. Like there's, how what are you going to do with all the pain? Because you have to feel it. Any feeling fully felt changes, my therapist once told me. So, in our last 3 minutes, tell me about letting the pain go or when you would unbubble wrap these things and how to let it
You
out of your
know
system.
how you said please enjoy the pain, and that's another technique that I've used, which is I've been really interested in understanding how people go through trauma in different situations, such as my family are all Holocaust survivors. They all continue to work and live in Israel, my remaining family, and they're part of the defense establishment, and they support and defend the state. Um, I wanted to understand the history of my family and how they survived the trauma. And so there are several works that are written. Some of my, uncles and cousins have published books about the Holocaust, and there are many other works about the Holocaust. And that's just one aspect of how going through such tremendous trauma, how do you manage the life that you're going to live after the trauma, and how do you release it, and how do you actually truly have an authentic happy life? And the more I understood of what all of these amazing people did, that actually helped me with a roadmap of, there is um, a way that we all can share in the collective trauma, and that really can all help elevate us to feel like there is a um, purpose, a deep purpose for the suffering. And that really is one of the ways that helped me just release it. I just kept understanding more and more and more about what all of us can do in these situations by specifically studying the course of trauma of individuals that have been in these types of situations.
So yours was like an intellectual study of
Yes,
survivors of trauma. It wasn't like me. I had to like snot all over my dog and cry
yes,
my eyes out and they were sealed shut. But that wasn't like I mean, I think there's a gender difference too. Like I'm
there is.
yapping to everyone who will listen to me, even on a bus and
Thank
whatever.
goodness there's a gender difference. We need women to help us with trauma. Because the men really don't know what to do. The truth is, the women have the wisdom, and we're really just tagging along because intellectualizing it doesn't always help. But for me, for my specific case, it was a tremendous experience to understand. And so I needed to know, how did you do it? And please tell me, where did you go when you were, and some of these conversations I had, in prison, of course, because there were people that were there that had been incarcerated for 15 years, some even longer. And I wanted to understand, where do you go? I mean, and how does one preserve, their emotional and their intellectual, their, their mind and body and spirit in these terrible situations. But I think that's it's a all in all, it was a wonderful experience in the end for me. Even though I did suffer through many of these experiences, the remarkable thing is at the end, I feel like I'm a healthier person. I'm more grateful, and I'm definitely more connected spiritually to my life and to those that are in my life.
Yeah, I feel like I also went into this intellectual realm of having to sort of master human or physician psychology, at least, because my wounds came at the hands of physicians called my parents, who I love. But I wanted to understand, like, wait, how do these people who are so smart, who went to school this long, who really know in their minds and have the intellectual loops down of how you should be and how to take care of children because they've studied this. My mom even did a peds internship before she did psychiatry. I was like, wait, how do you mess this up so bad? Wait, you have all these loops in your mind, but you're not like able to really like enact this with your own family. And so I think the psychological understanding of how other people compartmentalize and they could know what to do, but they can't manifest it. I'm just really, I think what do they say about animals, like animals, herbivores on the Sahara who almost get like eaten by the carnivores? Like they shake it off and they have to do this thing to viscerally release it because animals, wild animals, don't keep it in an intellectual loop. But I do feel like I'm obsessed with psychiatry and physician psychology and psychologic autopsies and understanding, like that's what actually makes me feel safe. If I understand like why people are behaving the way they are, then I can feel really calm about it. But I do obviously feel pain, and my way of releasing it is through lots of tears and lots of snot and lots of crying. And I haven't really done that as much lately. I feel like I've probably cried more than so many people on this planet, but I really recommend it. So let's just summarize my 3 points. Oh, comedy is one of them. I just want to summarize the three things before I get off because I have this other session. But the three things that I do, and then maybe you can say your three things, right? Is that um, I, in order of just chronologically in my life, I think talking and talking and talking to anyone who will listen to me so that it's not just locked in my body and in my mind and I can get some feedback. At least somebody could hug me or say, oh, that's sad. Like anything that they could say helps me feel like I'm a valuable person that has a real story that deserves to be shared and I'm not alone with it. Like this feeling of being alone, which is why peer support works so well. I just, I just, the isolation I think is deadly. Okay. So that's one thing. Talk, talk, talk. Right, right, right.
Yes.
Um, the dissociation and comedy, because it is like when we can think about at a 30-foot view what we're going through, it's like ridiculous to be a good doctor in prison or somebody who's lost four family members, or I have like specialists in mental health that are doing a poor job raising me. You know, when you think about that, you're like, that's funny. That could be stand-up comedy. So a lot of the stuff that we find ourselves in, if you distance yourself enough, if you can laugh at it, it makes it more palatable. And then just like for me, emoting in a physical way with tears and like crying and having snot. I'll never forget there was a doctor who was suicidal who sent me pictures of him covered in snot laying on his bathroom floor. And I was like, yes, I've been there and I can feel that. I feel the pain of being covered in snot laying on the bathroom floor and keep breathing. Keep breathing. So anyway, do you want to summarize the three that you
Yes, sure, sure. Let's
bubble wrap was the first one, right? Just like
right.
put it on pause for later.
That's what I did in the beginning, and decide that that's going to have to be addressed later. And then the second thing for me was help another person. Be that person that can help them. That's what we're here for. And that really, I think, essentially was one of the things that saved my life. And it can't be emphasized enough. That's not just your professional work, but your personal life. Those in your family and your friends. And um, then I really believe that through all of the understanding and research that I did, that I think it's very important to design a code to live by each day. You're gonna design a simple code to live by each day, and that's going to begin at the center of who you are, and that will never change. And that is an enormous tool for me. I think that we can all design a very simple, beautiful, elegant code to live by in our life, and that is always something we can hold on to, that can anchor us. And then we can come to any situation and say, I'm always going to be here in this situation as this person, honest, kind, generous, strong, available, and any other thing you want to add to that. So that's what works for me.
And I think I'm hearing within that sort of the sacred holiness of the pain, like the please enjoy the unavoidable pain because this is Earth school and your soul can only grow if you can keep breathing and like feeling the pain of this, just like you would be feeling, I don't know, anything, an orgasm or anything. Like you have to feel it to experience it, and your body is the channel of these human experiences that you will never have on the other side, no matter what you believe that happens on the other side. Once you give up your physical body, you will never feel a migraine, you will never have constipation, you will never have all these things. So to have all this snot dripping over my sheltie, I don't know, that's an experience that I have that's sacred with my dog Happy. That, I mean, it helped me, and I don't know what it did for him, but I don't know, he was serving a great purpose for me. Hopefully he got something out of it. um, but I
Love
think
dogs. I
dogs
think
are
it's a
so
great,
sweet.
great thing.
Yeah.
Love your dog story.
So I'm going to let you go. And for anyone listening, if you like these kind of conversations and you want to know more about how to survive trauma, the dark night of the soul, suicidal thoughts, pain, if this helps you in any way, figure out how to take your next breath. The last thing we want to do is read more obituaries about doctors or anyone. There are so many reasons to stay here. And Amir and I will dive into this maybe on another session.
I look forward to it, Pamela. Thank you.
Bye.